We now have the tools for notating the durations of notes. Musical notation has strict bookkeeping rules. The first absolute rule is that every container of notes must be full. If a container has room for 4 quarter notes, it must contain the equivalent of 4 quarter notes, either as notes or rests. A 4 quarter note sized container can't have only 3.5 or 2 or 5 quarter notes. It must have 4 and only 4. Let me explain. This is the container I was talking about. In musical terms, it's called a measure or a bar. Measures are marked off with bar lines. The amount of notes held by each measure is determined by the meter signature, also called a time signature. In this case, the meter signature is 4/4. Notice that it's just a 4 on top of a 4, not a fraction. We say 4/4, not 4/4. 4/4 tells us that each measure contains the equivalent of 4 quarter notes. This is absolute. Every measure must contain the equivalent of 4 quarter notes, such as 8 eighth notes, 1 whole note, a half note and 2 quarter notes, 128 128th notes, and so on. We actually do have one exception to that rule at the beginning and end of a piece where we can have incomplete measures. We'll discuss this more when we look at pickup notes. Here's another common meter signature. My piano teacher taught me that this meter signature means 3 beats in a measure, quarter note gets the beat. That's mostly true, but not always. If the speed is very fast or very slow, the beat might be something other than the quarter note. But 3/4 always means measures contain 3 quarter notes. In other words, the bottom number tells us the type of note, whole note, half note, quarter note, eighth note, 16th note, and so on. And the top number tells us how many of those must fit into each measure. It also suggests how to group notes, which we'll discuss later, but that isn't absolute. The number of notes in a measure is. 2/8 means there are 2 eighth notes in a measure. 6/8 means there are 6 eighth notes in a measure. You probably noticed that 6/8 and 3/4 have the same number of eighth notes in a measure. Why have 2 different meter signatures for the same capacity measure? It has to do with how the eighth notes are grouped, whether by 2s or 3s. We'll save that for a future lecture about meter. One more meter signature. This meter signature is much less common than the ones we have already seen. It means there are 12 16th notes in every measure. It also suggests that 16th notes should be in 4 groups of 3, but that's for a later date too. That's enough for now. We aren't quite done with the nuts and bolts of notation, but we've made a good start. Here's what we covered. We said that the durations of notes are shown by note values, which use note heads, stems, flags, ties, dots, and beams. Every note value has a corresponding rest. The container that the notes fit in is called a measure, or bar, whose size is determined by the meter signature. Now you can try a set of questions about rhythmic values of notes and rests. In the next lecture, we'll look at notation in action on an actual musical score.